or high. Rhodes, the fourth largest island in Greece, enters the archipelago of Dodecanese in the Aegean Sea. It is located in the southeast of the country in 246 nautical miles from Piraeus. Rhodes Island from the west washes the Cretan Sea, and from the east Libyan. The population of 115,490 inhabitants on a census of 2011. The area of the island is 1,401.459 square kilometers, coastline extent -251 kilometers. Rhodes is the administrative center of community, the city of Rhodes, located in the northeast of the island. The international airport of Rhodes Diagoras is in 14 kilometers from the administrative center of the island in the village of Paradigone. Rhodes is often called a pearl of the Mediterranean. It is rich with natural beauty, historical and archaeological sites, and, of course, the most interesting history. According to the decision of UNESCO, the historical part of the city of Rhodes, the largest settlement of the island, is included in the list of the World Cultural Heritage. Rhodes, the island of an ellipse-shaped form, its maximum length -77 km, the maximum width -37 km. The passage Carpathos 47 km wide in the southwest separates Rhodes from Carpathos, the passage Rhodes 37 km wide in the northwest, from the peninsula of Bosporus of Asia Minor. As well as other islands of the Aegean Sea, Rhodes was formed after disintegration on Aegida's part, the continent stretching from the Ionian Sea to the coast of Asia Minor and the southern coast of Crete. Island relief mountainous. Geological breeds, limestones and slates form in the center of the island mountain system a tabary with three tops, a kramit in the southwest with the maximum height of 823 m, a tabary in the center, 1215 m, and Prophetacilius, Prophetilia, in the north, 798 m. This massif passes into insignificant on the area, but differing in fertility of the plain. The coast of the island is uncountable, in the majority the sandy beaches opened by bays and capes, such as Zonari in the northeast where there is a city of Rhodes, Laodosa Phocas in the east, Armanistus in the west and Presonice in the south, connecting to the main territory of the island a narrow strip of the earth enduring sea level rise turning into the island. Characteristic representatives of flora are coniferous, the plane tree, an oak, a thyme, capus, cyclamens and a set of species of field herbs. The special kind of a deer, a platona, living in forests of the island was a characteristic type of fauna since prehistoric times. Climate of Rhodes, Mediterranean, with an average temperature of 18-20 C. With soft winter and in the fresh summer that is caused by the northeast winds blowing in the summer, with a large number of sunny days. About 300 in a year. And high humidity. The island was inhabited since the Neolithic. In the 16th century BB it was under control of Minoan Crete, in the 15th century BB, Mycnids from Peloponnese. The Doriski cities on the spit and the coast of Asia Minor were colonies of Rhodes. After gained by Doriates at the beginning of the 11th century BB of Rhodes, it was divided into 6 independent city-states which formed in the 8th century BB the Doriski hexapolicy as a counterbalance to the Ionic Union. According to Herodotus, entered the hexapolicy located on the Low-Asian coast of the city of Halicarnas and Nid, Lind, Iolus and Khmer on Rhodes Island and also Braids. According to Herodotus, 6 touristy cities. The Rhodes cities, Halicarnas and Phalacida, Lynn's colony in Lycia, participated in the basis in Navcratis of the largest of the Greek temples in Egypt called Alani. It was occupied by Persians, but it is released after the victory of Athenians in 478 BB. In 408 BB the city of Rhodes was built on a Egyptomovi system with regular planning. Persians occupied the island once again in 340 BB, then the island was freed as a result of a Varakesky campaign on the east led by Alexander of Macedon. The subsequent period can be characterized as the period of the greatest blossoming. During this period Spikos Eskin and Apollonius Rodosky, astronomers Gipperk and Geminos lived and worked here. In 292 BB at an entrance to city port the Colossus of Rhodes, the huge statue of god Helios, one of 7 miracles of the ancient world which didn't sustain a destructive earthquake of 226 BB was built. In 164 BB Rhodes concludes the alliance with Rome. Paul the Apostle brings Christianity on the island. Since 395 Rhodes was a part of the Byzantine Empire. It is for the first time captured by Muslims, Arabs, in 672. It is returned to Byzantium by the Emperor Alexei Komnen. In 1309 the island the Knights Hospitallary who built here the main citadel, the Rhodes fortress seized. She sustained attacks of Egyptians in 1444 and Mehmed II Turk in 1480. After a months-long siege by Suleiman Velikolepni's forces in December 1522 Hospitaller were forced to leave the island and to go at first to Sicily and then to Malta. Together with Hospitaller the island was left also by a part of the Greek population. Since 1523 Rhodes was a part of the Ottoman Empire. Rhodosцы were involved in liberating War of Greece. 1821-1829. But military operations on the island it wasn't conducted because of large number of the Turkish population and basing of the joint Turkish-Egyptian-Algerian fleet. In 1912 after defeat of Turks during the Italo-Turkish War Italy receives Rhodes. Italians controlled the island till 1943. After an exit of Italy from war in 1943 the island was occupied by the German troops. Since 1945 Rhodes, as well as all Dodecanese, gets under the British Protectorate. Under the Parisian Agreements of 1947, considering aspiration of islanders to an enosis, reunion with Greece and also the contribution of Greece to an Allied victory and the victims suffered by the Greek people British go for transfer of the Dodecanese islands of Greece. In 1948 it is reunited with Greece. Nympha Rhodes, as reports in one of the Odes Pindar, was Poseidon and Amphitrite's daughter. According to other version, Aphrodite. And god Helios is beloved. When gods divided among themselves the earth, Helios faithful to the debt made around it the daily trip. Therefore during sharing god of the sun was absent. When Helios returned, Zeus, without wishing to leave him deprived, decided to make sharing anew. However, meanwhile Helios saw how from depths of the sea the big beautiful island rises. This island of Helios also asked for itself, having decided that his earth is worthy to marry there the nymph Rhodes. From this union 7 sons whom called Gileadami, and the daughter Electriona were born. The firstborn son Helios Kirkov had 3 sons, Lind, Camir and Iolus. Brothers divided among themselves fatherly possession, and each of them founded the city to which I gave the name. Other myth connected with the name of Rhodes and also with its first inhabitants, narrates that this island was originally inhabited by Talkeena, Talassus. Sons. Talkeena we were extraordinarily skillful in the crafts connected with fire and metals and also in magic. Poseidon fell in love with the sister of Techingalia, and that gave birth to him 6 sons and the daughter Rhodes, which gave the name to the island. Once Aphrodite appealed to Talkeena that those allowed her to arrive to the island, but was refused. The angered Aphrodite cursed them, having wished that those entered an incestuous relationship with own mother and that all earthdom was flooded by water. The Talkeena which were in advance warned by Zeus left the island in time, having left on in the sister. For a long time the flat areas of Rhodes were filled in with water. When Helios fell in love with the nymph Rhodes, he warmed her with the beams, and the water covering the island thus evaporated. One more myth connected with the settlement in Rhodes of Minoites narrates about Alphamon, the grandson of the Tsar Minos. Wishing to avoid execution of the prediction saying that he is fated to kill the father Katri, Alphamon left Crete and lodged in Rhodes where he founded the settlement under the name Cretinia in memory of the homeland. At Topatiberia Alphamon erected the temple in honor of Zeus. Many years later, in search of the only son to the island, there arrived Katri. From a distance Alphamon didn't recognize the father and, having decided that it is the pirate, killed him. So the prophecy was executed. Having learned the awful truth, Alphamon begged that the earth yawned and absorbed him, and this entreaty was executed. Alphamon, whose tragic image something reminds Oedipus, was esteemed by Rhodes as the hero. One more mythical hero, Tlepel, is connected with a statement on the island of Doriets. Was born Tlepel in Tiryns, and I was Heracles and Aschioche's son. He left the homeland and located in Rhodes after murder of the uncle of the father. Itself Tlepel died near Troy by hand of the ally of Trojans, the leader Sarpedon. In honor of Tlepolem, Rhodes celebrated a holiday of Tlepolemia. In one of sanctuaries of Rhodes also Elena Procrastina, who had Dendritids epithet wood, was esteemed. The following myth is connected with this cult. After the Trojan War, Elena arrived to Rhodes where the widow Tlepolema Polyxa reigned. Having learned about Elena's arrival, Polyxa decided to revenge for death of the spouse. The queen ordered to seize 2 soldiers Elena and to hang up her on a tree. Therefore Elena also got a nickname of Dendritid. Except Alphamon and Tlepolem, Forbent was a hero of Rhodes also. The legend says that once Rhodes abounded with snakes and was called Ophusa, Snake Island. In despair, inhabitants of the island asked for the help in the Delphic oracle. Fire gave a prediction according to which Forbent from the Thessaly tribe of Lapiths could save from a trouble them. Having found Forbent, Rhodes invited him to lodge at them, and later began to esteem him as savior. According to the myth, together with the daughters Danadami, Rhodes visited Danae, who erected the temple Athens in Lind. I visited Rhodes during search of the sister of Europe and the Phoenician Tsarevich Cadme. According to the legend, Cadme erected the temple in honor of Poseidon and devoted to Athena a copper with an inscription Phoenician signs. So the mythology explains the emergence in Rhodes to Phoenician writing. Throughout many centuries, Rhodes was an important trade port of East Mediterranean. The island played a significant role in the history of the region, and during his blossoming of special development literature and art reached. Painting, sculpture, poetry, philosophy, astronomy, physics and geography reached apogee here. Soon after the basis, the city of Rhodes concentrated all cultural life of the island, having created at the same time favorable conditions for stay of cultural figures from other areas here. From the Rhodes painting no samples remained. However, written sources report many data on works of artists in Rhodes. The famous Ephesian painter Parassi, the 5th century BB, and also the Protogene from the Kariski city of Kavna, the 4th century BB, worked at the island, deriving inspiration from plots of the Greek mythology. Much more richly than knowledge of ceramics. This art form developed in Rhodes since the Mycenaean era up to our days, and it is possible to see samples in the Archaeological Museum of Rhodes. In the 7th-6th centuries BB, the Rhodes ceramics endures blossoming, being only capable to compete with the Corinthian. Characteristic samples of this time are vessels with the images of wild goats, deer and griffins alternating with garlands from and flowers, and also Ficalerski style with the decor made of images of partridges on the central belt between strips of a flower ornament. Nika Samothrakia statue erected by Rhodes in a sanctuary Great Kabirov on Samothrakia in honor of a victory over Antiochus III in 190 BB. Special development was reached in Rhodes by a sculpture. The Rhodes masters used not marble, but perlite, which was covered with plaster. From 5th century BB in Rhodes there was an independent school of a sculpture. During the Hellenistic era, the school of the Rhodes sculpture was one of the most considerable in Greece and the most known in the East. During this period more than 130 masters from 50 Greek cities worked at the island. The Athenian Briascot. The middle of the 4th century BB. And Lysippus from Sicyon, who modeled a bronze quadriga with god Helios' statue, treat number of the most famous sculptors working at Rhodes. Lysippus has his pupil from Lynn created the well-known Colossus and the sculptor both. The 2nd century BB. Decorated with the works Athena Lindy's sanctuary. World-famous samples of a sculpture of the Rhodes art workshops are the bronze, Sleeping Urot, being in Metropolitan Museum of Art of New York, and famous Nika Samothrakia. The Museum of Louvre, who was erected by Rhodes in a sanctuary of great gods on Samothrakia after their victory over Antiochus III in 190 BB. Other remarkable sample of the Rhodes school of a sculpture is Lacan's group. The Vatican Museum, attributed to Alexander, Polydor and Afinitor. Rhodes was well known not only as the place of prosperity of the fine arts, but also as the homeland of many creators of literary works, such as Pisander from Khmer. The 6th century BB. Poets Kleebol from Lind. The 6th century BB. Who was one of 7 wise men of antiquity and the tyrant in the hometown, and also created the poem Geraclea, devoted to Heracles. His daughter is the poetess Cleobulina, quoted in 200 years by Aristotle. Well-known Timocreant from Iolus. The 5th century BB. The author of Melachesky verses, an Anaxandrite from Khmer. The 4th century BB. The author of comedies and dithyrambs. To Rhodes moved temporarily or even on for the rest of the life poet Apollonius from Alexandria. The 3rd century BB. Nicknamed Rhodes, the philosopher Aristot Kerensky, Socrates' pupil, and at last, the Athenian speaker Aeschines. The 4th century BB. Which founded school of oratory on Rhodes. Many Rhodocets were engaged in philosophy. Among them Eddie Rhodes, approved philosophy of peripatetics in Rhodes, and the representative of Stoical philosophy Panity. The 2nd century BB. From Khmer, the founder Sredni Stowe, who deserved recognition by the astronomical and philosophical works. In the 1st century BB there lived a pupil Panatia Posidoni here from Apame who wrote works on stories and was engaged also in physics, geography and mathematics. In Rhodes also the oratory prospered, philological sciences, high level was reached by geography, physics, mathematics, astronomy and medicine. Dionysius Phrygisci wrote the textbook of grammar, the astronomer Gipperk. The 2nd century BB. Made the first astronomical observations in Rhodes, and the medicine developed in health centers, so-called Asclepionicon was studied as science. The architectural appearance of this or that area is inseparably linked with morphology of her territory, its geographical location and historical past. The most considerable architectural complex of the island, his capital, arose on the northern outskirts, in key point of maritime routes of this region. Other considerable modern settlements are very close from the capital, on road highways which are connected by Antique Lind, Iolus and Khmer. In a northern part of the island there are main tourist attractions, whereas in the southern part the settlements interesting from the point of view of town planning, structure and architecture are located. The settlements of Rhodes can be divided into seaside and located in the island. Seaside, which the cities of Rhodes and Lind are among, are constructed in the form of an amphitheater at the natural harbour and usually, as, for example, Lind, have a sea view. The history of the seaside inhabited cities begins with antiquity. In particular Rhodes and Lind were large shopping centres which influence extended to the extensive territory. The history of two of these cities proceeds and is later in the Middle Ages, when all other settlements are transferred to an internal part of the island. Rhodes and Lind turn into powerful fortresses. Emergence of settlements in an internal part of the island was result of need of protection of inhabitants against attacks of pirates during the Byzantine era and after capture of Constantinople by Turks. Thus residents of seaside settlements choose for residence of the place, not seen from the sea, and such road arteries as slopes of mountains and hills, small valleys, plains or areas near the rivers, and create new settlements there. The majority of these new settlements receives fortification strengthenings. For protection against pirates build also fortresses in which inhabitants take refuge during attacks, and also the towers which are mainly on the coast of the island. The material used at construction of such settlements, a stone, the earth and wood, meets on the island much. Emergence of various types of the houses which are found in Rhodes was dictated by requirements of everyday life of the population, their aesthetic requirements, climatic conditions and relief. Such types 6. The rural or one-room country house serving to needy segments of the population. Such house consists of one, usually rectangular planning, the room satisfying all inquiries of family. In this room worked, ate, slept and received guests. The roof of the house was wooden, and served as a floor or the stamped earth, or a pebble covering. The one-room house gradually underwent evolution, having gained more irregular shapes. The room continued to remain a dwelling, and near it auxiliary rooms, kitchen, a shed and the furnace appear. Semi-town house. This type of the house meets in areas which residents were engaged in trade and navigation and therefore were well-founded. The considered type represents evolutionary option of country. Often houses of this type two-storied, with richly decorated exterior and an interior. The yard is separated from the street by a powerful wall with gate. Houses of the nobility in Lind. The conquerors owning this city, one of the most ancient on the island, had an impact on architecture of his houses. The majority of houses of the nobility of Lind is built at the beginning of the 17th century and have elements of island, Byzantine, medieval and Arab architecture. Their characteristic feature is the rich decor as interior of rooms, painted ceilings, and facades in the yard. The floors which are laid out by pebble. Towers. The buildings built during an era of domination of Knights Taf. Towers meet in the medieval town of Rhodes and near Trianda. These are the two-storied constructions which are skillfully constructed of a hewn stone with loopholes on the top floor. Turkish house. Stay on the island of Turks, naturally, had an impact on architecture of this region. The new type of the house undoubtedly bears traces of East influences, differing in modest furniture, but a rich decor of an interior. A characteristic element of the Turkish house is sakness, the wooden veranda closing balconies or windows of a facade. Marasiski houses. This type of the house meets in the settlement of Marasia. Houses differ in oblong planning, usually one story, and for this reason also makranaria are called. Lawn. The Rhodes fortress was the residence of 19 great masters of an award of Hospitalia, the Kalakuma center, quarter of the Rhodes Knights, and also a last refuge of inhabitants at the moment of danger. Constructed in the 14th century, she escaped at earthquakes and sieges, but was destroyed in 1856 by accidental explosion. The palace was restored by Italians in the 1930th years for Mussolini and Emmanuel III King Victor. Here mosaics from the island of Rhodes which plots gave names to halls are stored, and also there take place the exhibitions devoted to the history of medieval and antique Rhodes. The Valley Petaludes. Valley of Butterflies. Where in summer months butterflies of one look, a she-bear four-daughter flown, or Hera. The majestic Acropolis, which antique ruins are harmoniously bound with medieval walls and buildings of fortress of Hospitalia, dominates over the cozy village composed by white-brown architecture of both century and more modern constructions. 3 columns and the base of the Temple of Apollo built around the cyclopean sizes of a rectangular stone. The restored remains of theater and the only Olympic stadium which remained up to now in the world, an analogue of stadium of ancient Olympia. City of Lindos. Acropolis and medieval town. 7 sources. The natural park from the remains of hydraulic engineering constructions located near Columbia. Ruins of the ancient city of Camira with his city square, residential quarters and the water supply system of the 5th century BB, take to the distant past of the Hellenistic Rhodes. Church of the Dormition of the Theotokos to Asclepio and the medieval castle. The monastery of the Virgin Psambica where there is a sacred relic, a wonderworking icon of the Virgin Mary. The Virgin is considered the patroness of married couples including childless which come to visit the temple and to ask helps for the Mother of God. The airport of Rhodes bears a name of Diego Rodowski. The athlete Diego living in the 5th century BB was twice a winner of the Olympic Games in fisticuffs. To see he was lucky winners of the Olympic Games of 3 sons and even grandsons. It is sung by Pinder. His name is also borne today by a local football club. The basis of the economy of Rhodes before emergence of tourism was made by agriculture and livestock production. Mainly, cattle and also sheep and goats. Now a considerable part of the population is engaged in various professions connected with tourism whereas other population continues to be engaged in the spheres mentioned above. The main products made here are vegetable oil, wine, fruit, including a citrus. From a local grade of white grapes of Anatira in Rhodes produce resinous wine of Retsin. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.